Hello and welcome to the West Ham Breakdown with me, Jack Elderton, and my mate Callum Goodall, in a week where West Ham were again defeated severely by by a big side, comprehensively. Some would say a 5-2 loss to Arsenal. Cal, we were both there. It was a difficult watch at points, wasn't it?
It was, but at other points, I found myself just getting caught up in the madness of it all, and like you kind of forget that we're there as West Ham fans and also West Ham analysts and content creators, whatever you want to call us. And I was just kind of there, and it was almost out of body at times. I just felt like a neutral because it was so weird to experience because it just doesn't happen ever. Like, what was it, like 4 goals in 9 minutes? Like, just the chaos factor of it, just building and building and building was just, yeah, it was bonkers. It was great to great to witness. But then, like you say, you have those moments of like coming back down to earth and going, "Oh shit, we've just conceded 4 goals. I should probably be a bit more switched on and start to question how that's happened, rather than just thinking this is nuts." But yeah,
No, we're very professional. Cal is lying. This is a big porky. I don't know what he's on about. We were paying lots of attention and we knew exactly what was going on at all stages. No, I think, look, we did pay attention during the first 35 minutes where we went 4-0 down, and then 3 goals happened in quick succession, and I think we were just doing a lot of laughing
yeah,
during
yeah,
during that sort of last 10 minutes of the first half, which I think is fair as a reaction
yeah.
to what was happening. I mean, Soler picks out a ridiculous pass to Wan-Bissaka. Emerson knocks in a free kick that I didn't know he could do that.
No, neither.
And not score free kicks that well.
I joked to you,
And
didn't I? I was like, "Oh, this is Cresswell range. I wish he was on the pitch." And then
yeah,
Emerson
yeah, yeah.
stepped up. I was like, "Oh man!" And then he did it. I was like, "Oh shit! Okay, he must have heard me."
Yeah, exactly. Then he nearly scored another one,
Yeah,
almost exactly the same. Yeah, and then the madness of the fifth goal. So I mean, it was a bonkers game, and we are going to try to, over the next 45 minutes or so, unravel as much as we can for you and for ourselves, to try and work out exactly what has happened. And I think the best place to start that in a game where you've conceded 5 times is probably just to go through the goals and look at what on earth has happened in each of them. And we can start with the first theme, which opens us up into a bigger conversation, and then I promise we'll come back to the goals afterwards, with Gabriel's goal, which comes from a corner, which we defended terribly. I know there was a big frustration about the timber block on Paqueta for this goal. And a lot of people felt there was a foul. Julian Lopetegui felt that it was a foul. I think with the rules currently where they are, I think you'd be very lucky to get that given in the Premier League at the moment. I think there is a bias the other way. So if the defensive team does something like that, you're probably more likely to get called up for it than you are if you're the attacking team. And I think they are looking for blocks, but I think this is very cute, basically. I think they're looking for blocks where people have 2 arms out or are wrapping around someone, not backing in. I don't think they see that. I don't think they're quite as aware of it at the moment. And I'm not sure we've seen too many examples. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I can't think of examples where those have been given either by a referee or by VAR after the fact. So I think it's just typical Arsenal, right on the borderline of what's legal on set pieces, and exploiting those margins where they can. They're the best at it. I think it's worth saying that. From our perspective, Cal, if you can, and you might not be able to, can you explain to me why we completely upended our entire defensive approach to set pieces from a more zonal approach to a more man-to-man approach, and then somehow managed to leave Gabriel, the most dangerous man for Arsenal, free on several occasions to score and later win a penalty? It seems completely ludicrous to me.
yeah, completely baffling. The only thing I can think is that we just kind of overanalyzed it almost. Like, obviously, so much has been made about how effective Arsenal are with Nicolas Javier as the set piece coach, and rightly so, because they have been incredible. And I think they do it very differently, don't they? I think it's easy to get caught up in the whole it's like the reverse of the bus stop thing that Southgate did. It's just at the back post now, where everyone's chilling at the back post. And I think we probably got caught up in that a bit. And they've obviously gone away and gone, right, well, these guys are doing something differently, so we need to go and do something different as the antidote to that. My issue is, I don't have any issue with going away and coming up with a specific game plan or set piece plan that attempts to sort of address the strengths of Arsenal. But what I don't understand, and what I was especially confused by, is how, in the process of planning those, you end up with arguably your two biggest aerial threats not really that, like, just give one of Kilman or Souček the assignment of Gabriel. I know that Kilman's zonal central, so I guess he's kind of expected to pick up the Gabriel run at some point potentially, but Antonio's initially with him. Antonio fails to track him because of the blockers. Souček by the end of it is just completely irrelevant. He's nowhere near the ball. He's still at the back post, and everyone, including our own players, have all moved towards the near post. So in any set piece situation, when you're defending your own box, to have a plan that doesn't involve Souček right at the heart of it is crazy, and even crazier to have him not involved at all. So that was baffling, but I think that's how we probably ended up where we were. But yeah, the steps that they took after to come up with the plan was pretty wild. And I understand that it's difficult, obviously, because of how good they are at it. But like I say, you overcomplicated it. I think, like, go back to basics. Just put your biggest bloke on Gabriel and hope that they can match him. And if not, then unlucky. But I can't really call it unlucky at the minute because it was so obvious that he was the biggest threat, and we failed so miserably to track it.
Yeah, look, I think from my side, and I'm not a set piece specialist, and there are some people who are absolutely incredible at analysing set pieces. I'll be interested to see. I think it's Jake Fox, is it, the Arsenal set piece analyst? I'll be really interested to see what he says this week about these, because it was a big feature of the game, but a huge part of how this game was won and lost. What I would say is that I do think it makes sense to have Souček and Kilman as two of your players in the zones if you are going to defend this way. I would personally have at least 4 zonal defenders. Yeah. I would never have a situation where it's just 3, because it creates exactly what we see, where players are moving out of the zones because they're panicking about situations. The ball can come between your near post zonal defender and your central zonal defender, or your central zonal defender and your back post zonal defender, and you're going to get situations where those individuals might panic and jump out of their zones or move into another zone. And remember, it's not always about first contact as well. So sometimes first contact is a flick on from the near post to the back post. So it's still important to have someone like Souček at the back post in case that's going to be the kind of set piece we see. Doesn't have to be Souček, but it does make sense to have a really strong aerial defender at the back post in those situations. So anyway, I wouldn't have 3. I also wouldn't have 3 that bakes in, and maybe this is just the nature of the 11 that we had, but I wouldn't have 3 that bakes in a weakness. It's very obvious if your 3 is Souček, Kilman and Paqueta, that if there's any flexibility for the opposition to target one of those zones, they're going to go straight after the zone that Paqueta's in, which is exactly what we saw. And then I don't understand the lack of adaptation beyond there. So for me, I think if I'm baking in the fact that there's going to be a weaker zone, I would definitely have 2 in that zone. So, Kilman, look after the centre by yourself, that's fine. Souček, look after the back post by yourself, that's fine. Paqueta, look after the near post by yourself, probably not. I'd put one in there with him. I'd probably put Emerson in there with him. We've seen that before as the setup in other games. Emerson as the first player, and Paqueta as in the second zone, or Paqueta as the first player and Emerson in behind him. Generally the other way around. I think that's important anyway when you have players like Paqueta or attackers basically defending the near post, because they can do exactly what Paqueta does on so many occasions in the first half, which is step forward away from the zone towards the ball. So you can see on almost every corner before the ball's played, as the ball's being played, Paqueta is moving forward. Just kind of, sometimes it's difficult as maybe a player that isn't drilled on this all of the time, or isn't always practicing defending aerials and stuff like that, to have the confidence to just stand in the zone and to withstand whatever comes in, and to be confident you're going to be able to win the duel. There's a lot of kind of maybe a happy feet starts, jumping around on your feet, eager to try and get out and win the ball, especially if you're the near post defender. And then it's a bit kind of like, a horse out of the traps, just like, oh, I'm going to run forward now because the ball's been played in and I've gone under the ball again. And that happened a lot with Paqueta in the first half. They targeted it with Timber. I thought it was very strange that we went a mixture of zonal and man-to-man, and Timber doesn't have a man on any of the set pieces throughout the entire first half. So there's no one to block Timber, to stop him from then running in behind Paqueta on every set piece and shoving Paqueta by backing into him. I don't understand the lack of adaptation, like I said, from Paqueta. Obviously, there's someone got in his ear in the second half, because you see the first corner in the second half, instead of moving forward, he's like leaning all of his body weight back, expecting Timber
like one of
to
those
come in
trust
behind
exercises.
him. Yeah, like trust falling back into where Timber's going to come in behind him. So I don't understand why that didn't happen sooner, because surely, after it's happened on 3, 4, 5 corners and someone's blocking you under the ball, you're going to start countering that in some way, but he didn't. And what ends up happening, we'll talk about this later with maybe just talk about it now. I'm jumping forward because we're just doing the set pieces chat. But with the fifth goal, what ends up happening is, and this was happening already before in the first half, is Kilman starts coming out of the centre zone because Paqueta is getting blocked out of the near post zone to then take the near post zone. And again, this is basically what I'm saying. Number one, I probably wouldn't have done this whole adaptation. If I was going to do the whole adaptation, I would definitely have 2, because Paqueta's too weak as a zonal defender compared to Kilman and Souček to defend it on his own. And then as a consequence of both of those things happening, you then get your central zonal player leaving the centre zone to go to the near post zone because they can see how bad the issue is at the near post. And that's what leads to the fifth goal. Kilman takes too many steps forward to cover for what Paqueta is doing through most of the first half. Realises the ball's actually now targeting the space behind him. Again, incredible from Arsenal, right? They're obviously running this same kind of set piece, seeing the success they're getting from it, seeing that Kilman's stepping forward, and then going, well, now we can go for the one between Kilman and Souček, because now that's going to become the area to target. Run it exactly perfectly. Kilman has to be stepping backwards at the time the ball is coming in. That means he can't jump. Gabriel's able to lever on top of, use him as leverage really to get higher up. And Fabianski, well, apparently it's not a penalty according to many, but for me this is as stonewall as they come, really, in my view. I know people think keepers should be protected a lot, but I think it's exactly the same as going in for a tackle and missing the ball. If you go for a punch and you punch the player, even if you make some kind of contact with the ball, if you've really punched the player, then I think you've given away a penalty. I think that's just how it works and how it should work. And I think keepers shouldn't be protected. I think those things should always be given as pens. There's obvious examples where even if contact is exactly the same time, you get some kind of contact on the ball, but you punch the player in the head at the same time as you're doing it, it's a bit of a problem. So yeah, penalty for me.
Yeah,
and
I'm inclined to agree. I think if you strip it back, it's not about the intention, is it necessarily? It's not like Fabianski's gone up and gone, right, I'm going to climb. But at the end of the day, it's a chain of errors that has led to Fabianski having to go for that. Yeah. And therefore, the penalty is punishment for your mistakes that have led to this scenario. And when it comes to that, I know that's not exactly how the rulings work, but it's why I can sort of rationalise it. And like you say, at the end of the day, he has punched someone in the head. So you can't really run. Yeah, you can't be too frustrated about it. I can understand a little bit of frustration about it, or maybe it's a little bit soft. He has tried to win the ball. He maybe has got a little bit of contact on the ball, but at the same time, you can't be too mad. If really the key thing here that we're drawing out is if your whole set piece, if your bespoke defensive approach for set pieces in this game has quite clearly not worked at all, then I think that's the bigger issue rather than, a block here or there, or maybe a slightly, in some people's estimation, slightly harsh penalty. I don't think those are the central issues. It's the same, isn't it, as like when something happens and a defender's forced into making a lunging challenge, and then people often say, oh, well, he's given the referee a decision to make and he shouldn't have had to give him a decision to make in the first place, and therefore that's why he's being punished. It's not about the intent. He's made the referee to make a decision. And it's the same thing. It's like we cocked up, and then Fabianski's had to do that, which he otherwise wouldn't have liked to have done, but he's had to because of our mistakes. And then the referee has a decision to make. And as soon as you put a ref in that situation, you kind of, it's 50-50 chance, isn't it, really, these days?
Yeah, this is wild. Never on the West Ham breakdown have we been doing a breakdown of the goals and only got 2 in out of the 5 and have to take a break. But we're going to take a break after just set piece chat on those 2, and then we'll do the other 3 afterwards. So, if 2 of the goals were conceded from set pieces, and we can see that that's just a clear part of what's gone wrong in this game, and is a big reason why Arsenal were able to win it. We talk about the other 3 other goals now. I think we can talk about, I'm sorry for not doing this in chronological order. I had every intent to, but some of them pair up a little bit more nicely. So we've done goals 1 and 5. If we now do goals 3 and 4, I think we can see 2 clear individual errors from Paqueta. Not a failing of the team, not a failing of multiple individuals, not a failing of the structure. For me, these are 2 clear-cut individual errors from Paqueta. The 3rd goal is a very lazy challenge on Saka in the box. I think he should be more goal side, be forcing Saka out. Maybe he gets round him, maybe he gets a shot off, but there are blockers in place and more chance that you're going to be able to block that kind of shot. Saka's very good in those situations. I get why he ends up in the body position he ends up in, but it's just not the right body position to be in to make a tackle. He's too far away. He shouldn't be lunging on Saka in the box.
I think at that point you have to just give up, don't you? You go, okay, he's cooked me. Sticking the leg out that's the issue. It's like, if you've been done by Saka, then fair enough. He does a lot of people, but at that point you just have to go, okay, I've messed up here. If they score, it's my fault. But they might not score because my other defenders might bail me out, and that would be lucky. But what you can't do is just give up and then lash out. Not lash out, but you know what I mean. It does feel very rash and kind of like frustration-led almost. And then it's like you've taken the opportunity for your defenders to bail you out away from them, and you've just given them essentially a goal because they've got Odegaard and Saka, who are not going to struggle to put away a penalty.
Yeah, and taking any advantage away from the keeper, like narrow angle with blockers in front of you, you've got to just, dive to the far post versus a penalty. It's a completely different situation. A chance that's maybe 0.06 or 0.08 XG becomes 0.79 or whatever it is at the moment. So it's a really silly thing to do. And then the 4th one...
That's just bonkers, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it's funny, this one, isn't it? Because when you're watching it live, I think both of us looked at it and went, oh, maybe Kilman could have got there. Maybe, I don't know, just the way it looks as he's sort of lunging out to try and clear it, you think, oh, maybe there's something wrong there. But when you watch it back loads of times, you stop watching Kilman and you start watching Trossard and you start thinking, now that is a wild pass from Trossard. 2 yards further forward, Fabianski gets there to sweep it. 1 yard further back, Kilman clears it. Without the backspin, it bounces through to Fabianski, and it's a more difficult finish for Havertz because the first touch is more challenging. Fabianski's going to be rushing out at him. He has to then dribble Fabianski or chip him. But he puts all the backspin on it, so it just lands perfectly for Havertz. It's an unbelievable pass off Trossard's weak foot.
Crazy.
Ridiculous ball, and Havertz finishes it very well. Fabianski is committed because he's been further forward in the build-up structure, so he starts moving backwards and he has to move forward again. So that's why it looks maybe like he's rushed out too early. It's just that his starting position is the starting position he would be in when we have the ball. And the real thing is the Paqueta turnover. I'm not sure why he's trying to dink the ball past Jorginho in such a dangerous area in the centre of the pitch. We've seen this before with Paqueta. It's a bit of a disaster on his part, really. And do we need to talk about it much more than that, Cal? I don't think so. I think it's just an individual error turnover in the centre, right?
Yeah, I think the only thing I would say is people might see where it was on the pitch in terms of how close it was to their goal versus our goal and wonder about it being dangerous. But I think this is a problem that I have with Paqueta recently, is like, okay, it's not like a dangerous area in terms of it's not him trying to do it on the edge of his own box, but it's the sort of awareness of the game state in that moment of like, all of our players are basically committed forward. There's like not really any defence. We're so high up. Okay, yeah, you're closer to their box than our own, but like we're all miles away from that goal. So if you lose the ball here, regardless of where it actually is as a coordinate on the pitch, the team is not in a good situation right now to defend any turnover. So therefore, look around, scan, realise that, and play the safer option, not trying to dink it over the legs of okay, he's old, but one of the most experienced defensive midfielders in the league. It just was laughable really at the moment, because I think there was a few things beforehand that had frustrated me already with Paqueta watching it live, and then that happened, and coming off the back of what felt like just horror at that point. I was like just being punched while I was down, and then that I was just like, oh, of course, this is the next goal. This is how it happens.
Well, I think that's what we're seeing really on goals 3 and 4. A bit of frustration and indiscipline kicking in all of a sudden with Paqueta, and the frustration on the penalty, and then indiscipline on the 4th goal. Just kind of trying to do things on the pitch to fix it yourself. Or I'm not even sure it's that. It's just, trying to play silly passes in the centre of the pitch without an awareness of what's around you. Like you say, where are your teammates? What's behind you? Is this a bad place to lose the ball? Should I do something a bit more sensible? None of that. So definitely very frustrating goal to concede. The second goal, the Trossard goal, is the one goal of the lot that I would say is more of a team level collective failing. I think again it stems from Paqueta's positioning to begin with. He passes, and we'll come on to this. It's actually a really nice goal to segue onto the next discussion, because it's a good example of the man-to-man structure in midfield that we saw against Newcastle playing out actually against Arsenal, a team that are a bit more rotation heavy rather than the rigidity of Newcastle. So because Ødegaard is maybe not where you would expect Sean Longstaff to be, or where he was defending against Sean Longstaff in the previous match, he actually goes back in with Havertz into the back line, passes Ødegaard off, but then he does the very silly thing of, as soon as Ødegaard gets on the ball, going straight back to man brain and jumping out of the defence, which creates a gaping hole for Saka to run into. So by jumping out of the defence, he's created the gap for Saka to run off his back into that space he's opened. If he hadn't dropped into the defence to match Havertz's original run, then Kilman would have been further across defending that space. It would be much more difficult for Saka to get in there. But then there are some big errors that follow it, aren't there? I mean, Somerville does exactly what we warned he might do on the preview podcast, which you can listen to every week over on Patreon. First 7 days free, patreon.com/analyticsunited. We spoke there about being concerned about him being a zonal defender against Arsenal, and the potential for him to follow the ball rather than the man, especially against Saka or Ødegaard. We highlighted exactly this, and this is what happens on this example. So Saka gets the jump on Emerson for a brief second, and Somerville is in a perfect position to just match the run. He's inside Emerson, and he just is following the ball around. He's watching the ball. He's not aware that Saka's running straight past him through on goal. Doesn't pick up the run. It's difficult for Emerson, isn't it? I feel for him a little bit, because Somerville's in the way, so he can't then speed up to match Saka. He'd have to have run directly through Somerville's body. Perhaps on another day, just like throwing him out the way. To get there, but it's difficult. Saka's timed it perfectly. And then the last one is it's Wan-Bissaka, who plays Saka onside, staying with Trossard behind the rest of the defensive line. Credit to Somerville, actually, whilst he's ball watching, does manage to step up with the rest of the defence, even if he's not aware of the Saka run. Wan-Bissaka not so, and then also loses Trossard, which is a bit of a bad combination to play everyone on side, to be with your man and then simultaneously lose your man as well. Not great from him. So lots of errors playing into that goal. But at the same time, like I said, when I say Saka timed it well, I was going to, perhaps you should sum this up for us, maybe, is Arsenal score this goal all the time.
I was going to say,
they're so good at this, aren't they?
This is how they want to score. This is why they have, this is why they brought in Ødegaard, to unleash Saka and get that combination. And now, obviously, Ødegaard's back, but we're years into this partnership that they've developed, and it is their sharpest weapon. It is their most damaging attack, and they will try and play it as many times as they possibly can, because it's the most effective means of attack. And when they get it right, and they only need to get it right once a game, really, for the goal, because as soon as they're in that position and they're onside, it is a goal. Whether it's Saka through and then he shoots to the far post, or drills it to the near post, or squares it doesn't matter. He will choose the right decision 9 times out of 10, and 9 times out of 10 it will be converted. Whilst I think there is as we've already highlighted, various errors that result in it being a goal. I think part of it is, as we've said, just the errors are almost forced by the fact that Arsenal are just so good at this. It's not like not like the other goals where it was actual genuine individual errors. I think this is a goal where Arsenal are putting you in a position or putting you in a situation where they think you probably will make a mistake because of the technical level that they're performing at. And yeah, I mean, it's a great team goal. And I think we both said in the stadium, the first 30 minutes of Arsenal was just, well, 40 minutes probably. The way it was just clicking, the way they weren't rushing, the way they were happy to just, as we said, rotate, Calafiori coming inside, Declan Rice dropping to right back at times, Odegaard going out to the wing, but also coming into the number 6 at times to come and dictate play. Like, all of those rotations raise so many question marks, and I think we'll come on to it when we talk about the man-to-man versus the zonal out of possession shape, but I think it was our undoing for a lot of the game, but also it will be the undoing of most sides in the Premier League at some point this season, because they are just built to do it. I think the tactical understanding is second to none at the moment, bar potentially Liverpool. But honestly, having watched a bit of Liverpool this season and a bit of Arsenal, I think that 40 minutes of Arsenal is the best I've seen a side in the Premier League play this season, just in terms of control, but also threat at the same time. It wasn't like one or the other, it was both. And yeah, I mean, the profiles that they've now got, having introduced Calafiori and Timber into the team this season, it's just nuts. It's just nuts, like the amount of options that they have, like so many different systems they can run out with. They can do the whole, we're going to have 30% possession and be knobheads all game and hit you on the break with a Saka run, or Havertz just as a sort of outlet in the same way that we use Souček, but just with infinite amounts more technical ability. Or we can do we're going to have 70% possession, control the game, pick our moments, and just use these rotations to unlock your defence. A team that can do both things is not
to such a high level. Yeah,
it's hard enough to be really good at one thing. Like, we at one point were very good at one of those things under David Moyes, and we could never ever 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 do the other one. And we've seen glimpses of us try and do the other one this season in moments, but the detriment has been that we were absolutely terrible at the other side of the game. And the fact that they can just flip between the two is bonkers. It is bonkers. But also, like, it's, yeah, if I'm going to take my West Ham hat off for 1 second, just from someone who enjoys football and enjoys tactics, like just watching it play out, watching the profiles and watching how well drilled they are, it is actually really, really impressive and quite just good to watch, really.
They're a good side. And with that dynamic back between Odegaard and Saka, the trick to unlock the defence is back. And I think previously we saw a side that maybe was struggling a little bit more. Build-up solutions not quite so good. Odegaard is so good in those areas as well, pulling players out of position, and we'll talk about that immediately on the next section. Helps them there, but it's just the quality in the final third that he adds is just immeasurable. He changes everything for them in the final third, and they're going to be very difficult to defend against for any team across the rest of the season if they keep players fit. Because playing like they are at the moment, they're a nightmare. They're a nightmare to deal with. And Arteta came out in the post-match press conference and said as much, didn't he? He was like, for 30 minutes we were brilliant. We were exquisite, flawless, faultless, outrageously good. And that's a fair representation of what happened. They in that first 30, 35 minutes were impeccable. And and I will say, although they scored a few goals, I don't think we were that bad. I think on a collective level, we handled it relatively well. You know, how many big chances did we give away? Not that many. You're looking at the penalty, you're looking at a set piece, and one big chance to score, which they scored. Obviously, that's a disaster to give away a penalty and to give up a big chance in the first half an hour of a game at home. But I'm not looking at it saying, you know, they missed countless other chances. There were 1v1s. They hit the bar. There was none of that. And I think a lot of the other situations where they tried to get into the box, we defended those quite well. Todibo had a very good first half an hour, coped incredibly well. Some really good headers out of the box. Kilman, not quite at his best in this game, but Souček covering space as well. I thought Souček did really well in moments to kind of detach from his man, which was Rice, and then match a run into the box, defend that. Two fullbacks we'll come on to later in the podcast, I think they handled very, very well. So it was tough. It was tough. They put us under a lot of pressure, and it could have been worse than it was if players hadn't stood up in individual duels. Look at the dueling numbers at the end of the game. We've actually come out on top in both elements, ground duels and aerials. So I would say the players, whereas in other games we're maybe saying the players haven't done a good job here and the structure hasn't worked very well, and we've come up against a good team, and all three of those things together is going to lead to a very bad day. I think the structure didn't cope very well, and we came up against a good team playing at their very best. But I do think our players, for the most part, gave it their best and coped as well as they could have. Maybe save Paqueta, who, as we've just talked about, was really culpable on all 5 of Arsenal's goals to some degree. I think maybe left hanging out to dry a little bit on the set pieces, defending the near post alone and being blocked by Timber. But certainly on the other goals, can do and should have done a lot better than he did. Coming on to midfield, which I know we've done quite a long time already, so we're going to have to rattle through this, but it's really the context for all of this is that we rolled out the exact same team as we did against Newcastle. We're very successful against Newcastle, going man-to-man in midfield. That would have been Paqueta against Longstaff. It would have been Soler against Gimraesh and Soucek against Willock. And none of those players left their zones. None of those players. You didn't see situations in the Newcastle game where Willock ended up in Longstaff's position and Longstaff ended up playing left back, and so, the left back, Lewis Hall, comes and starts being a number 10 like Calafiori. We didn't have to deal with that against Newcastle, and our players held up in those individual battles very well, and we functioned as a team as a result. Arsenal, from minute one, knew exactly how to cause us an absolute nightmare defensively, and you see it straight away from the first build-up routines. You see Rice and Jorginho start, Rice on the left and Jorginho on the right, and Soucek and Soler look very comfortable, and then Rice runs across Jorginho towards the right wing. Jorginho runs the other way. Ødegaard goes back towards right back. Timber goes to number 10. Calafiori comes in at the other sort of left 10, and the shape is gone straight away from the first minute. You've got players looking at each other going, where do we go? Who I don't know who to pass off who to. Midfielders desperately trying to work out, shall I run, Soucek, should he go all the way across with Rice? Should he give him to Soler? Or should Antonio maybe drop back and help out in this situation? And you end up really with a situation where you're marking space and not players. Maybe the midfielders are marking players, but Somerville is left marking space whilst Calafiori's in a dangerous position. Or, sorry, it would be the other way around. Somerville's left marking space while Timber's in a dangerous position. Bowen is left marking space whilst Calafiori's come into a dangerous position. They have lots of ways to now build through, access players in the final third. And what ends up happening really is we're forced to defend our box for very long stretches of the first 35 minutes because of how good Arsenal were at rotating heavily in midfield, causing us big problems and making it very difficult for our structure to be able to cope and effectively press in any kind of way against them. We had breakout moments within that. We nearly scored. Somerville did get in behind on one occasion. And again, I think that's a summary really for me of how in the individual battles, in the moments where they got close enough, our players did quite a good job for the most part. And Soler, will come on to later, did a very good job in his individual battles. But it was tough, and it was a lot really to do with how well Arsenal did in terms of rotating in midfield themselves and causing us big problems. I think the comparison that would be very interesting for people here to kind of open up a discussion about what's this like, where have you seen maybe other examples of this in the Premier League, is Marcelo Bielsa's Leeds, talking about man-to-man versus zonal structure. So if we look at Bielsa maybe versus Moyes as two kind of opposite examples of this, and Cal, if you can give them a bit of a sense of those two different examples and how they function, and then how this kind of falls into the gap of being not quite one nor the other, but suffering the problems of both at the same time.
Yeah, so I mean, in a nutshell, we could probably do an entire podcast on the differences in football and philosophies between Moyes and Bielsa, and it'd probably be one I'd listen to. But in a nutshell, Bielsa, if you think of it as a spectrum of, at one end, man-to-man marking, that's Bielsa. Every player has a man. Follow him. Come hell or high water, do not leave him alone. Doesn't matter if you're centre-back and you're dragged all the way to follow them to the centre-back, because everyone has a man, and therefore if everyone does their assignment to the T, it shouldn't really matter because everyone follows everyone everywhere and no one's left unmarked. At the other end of the spectrum is zonal marking, which instead of marking the man, you're marking the space, and that, to my mind, is much simpler in theory because you don't have to necessarily think as much. You don't have to worry about the rotations as much because I am responsible for this block of space around me, and anyone that comes in it, I will take responsibility for. And if more than one person comes in it, then I will call over the nearest person to take and help me in that area. And that was sort of the foundation of David Moyes' football, right? It's why we saw the mid to low block and Souček's role being so defined and everyone's role being so defined. Like,
I was just going to say, for them, it works really well when you have players like Souček and Rice in your midfield who can absolutely dominate a zone in the midfield, right?
Yeah, 100%. And I think probably at both ends of the spectrum, actually, and I think probably because they are right at the very end of either side of the spectrum, I think if done well, as it was under Moyes, and also in parts as it was under Bielsa, the two methods of out-of-possession approach can enable a team to punch above its weight in the right conditions. I think for Moyes and the zonal stuff, it simplifies the game, and the quality of the opposition doesn't necessarily matter as long as you get your part of the game right and your players perform, at least give you a 7 out of 10, and the collective buy-in is there because the team functions as one unit rather than a bunch of individuals. At the other end of the spectrum, as I said earlier, if for Bielsa all 11 of those players did a sterling job on an individual level, the collective level kind of comes from those 11 individual performances and just clicks together like that. And if everyone is up to it, they can do it because it's impossible for anyone to perform well under those conditions when executed well, because no one is press resistant enough to play under 90 minutes of intense pressure, because you will make mistakes that will lead to turnovers, that will lead to transitions, and that will lead to goals. That's how Leeds did so well. But against certain opposition, when you have these rotations, when teams come in and can drag your man-to-man all over the pitch, then space does open up because your Leeds, you don't, like, yes, you might get it on some days, but you don't have the world's best players, and therefore there are going to be lapses in concentration, like we see with Lucas Paqueta in a man-to-man system. And as soon as you go up against a really intelligent opposition with incredibly technically gifted players who can spot these moments and these lapses and capitalise on them, your whole structure then falls apart because
it becomes when you're Leeds not managing maybe the best team in the world, and it's the same with West Ham. If you put maybe a player that can't dominate a zone so well, maybe they lose a bit of a physical edge or whatever in an area. Like, think of Zuma when he lost his legs, it falls apart. A Gerd not physically able to dominate a zone on the pitch, it all falls apart. Leeds, you maybe go from a group that were really bought in and really understand it. You have to bring in some new players to be able to function at the top level in the Premier League. It goes well for a bit. You've got guys like Rafinha who are perfect for this kind of approach. Yep. And then teams start to think, well, maybe we could put Robin Koch on the right wing by, pulling our striker all the way deep. Yep. And then, maybe it could be Dan James who ends up at centre-back. And then you're in a world of hurt, and that's an exaggeration, but that's the kind of thing that you start facing, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, 100%.
Yeah, so I think if we're to talk about the gap that we fell into in this match, is that you've got 3, maybe 4 players who are very man-to-man. You've got the 3 midfielders who are all man-to-man focused, where they can be. And I say where they can be. They were just man-to-man focused, but they were ending up in situations where they couldn't follow their man, so then it starts to look a little bit different. But the idea was to be man-to-man quite clearly. And then you've got the centre-backs where one of them will go with Havertz, the other one will stay and mark the space. You could also maybe put the fullbacks into that. Maybe you could put the fullbacks in who are kind of man-to-man-ish with Trossard and Saka, but more are likely to stay in the back 4 if those players dropped all the way off. So you didn't see situations. I think it's probably best not to put them in that zone, because we saw situations where Trossard ended up, delivering balls to the front line from alongside Jorginho in defensive midfield. You didn't see Wan-Bissaka chasing all the way forward and into the number 10 position in those examples. You saw him stay in the defence. So you got 4 players. Really, it was more.
I guess it was more zonal with a trigger press when they enter the zone. Yeah. Like, when you come into my zone, I am going to be man to man in this area, in the sense that I'm going to be really close to you and not give you any space to breathe, but not man to man in the sense that I'll follow you all the way down to the other end of the pitch.
Yeah, exactly that. And what happened here is with a combination of players who are operating on a sort of man-to-man basis and other players who are operating on a zonal basis, all the way around that, centre-back, 2 full-backs, wingers and striker. What Arsenal did really, really effectively was, we're going to drag all of your midfielders out of the midfield, and now you're going to have a bunch of zonal players who are all marking space. You're not protecting actually the centre of the pitch. And it was that was the big problem for us in this game, and instructive, I would say, for the future success of the system. So great against Newcastle, worked really well. Come up against a team with a strong level of tactical understanding, knew how to cause it all sorts of problems straight away without massive adaptation on their part. So more, I think, a big lesson for us that in games against teams that are very rigid, yeah, maybe. In games against teams that are heavily rotational or have the capacity to be heavily rotational, absolutely not. It's not going to work. It's going to cause us big problems, and we're going to end up in situations like we were in this game, where there are lots of moments in the first half where Somerville is standing somewhere, but you're effectively playing with 10 men because he's neither marking the space that he needs to be, nor marking a player that's that's dangerous, and that then becomes very difficult to defend.
I think. Sorry, I was just going to say. I think the only thing I'd quickly add before we move on, and I'm conscious of time, but I think some people will think, well, can't we just kind of do the zonal thing, but with the sort of man-to-man principles, where rather than say someone's responsible for Ødegaard, they're just responsible for the right-sided central midfielder or the person in that position, but they just go intensely. Yes, in an ideal world, that would be amazing and probably my preferred method. But again, you're looking at some of the best players in the world who would be cognitively aware enough to do that. And I just don't it would require someone to know at any given moment who in that rotation is going to now come into the zone, and then watch their runs and track them come in from all different areas. And with Arsenal, it's impossible to know because, as we said, it could be Calafiori, it could be Ødegaard, it could be Rice, it could be Timber, it could be Havertz dropping all the way in. And yeah, I think that's why it's so impossibly difficult. I think in principle, love that idea, but it's just so difficult. It's just why we don't see it. And it's why we see us try and do it and fail miserably.
And teams at that level are really good at exploiting things like that. Look at what Bernardo Silva did for City in their game against us. It's very different context, but teams at that level are very comfortable maybe putting 2 players in one zone of the pitch where there's only one defender because they know you're going to be overloaded in that area. So if you're functioning on that basis and your 3 midfielders are sticking to those zones, you might see situations where Ødegaard comes out into the zone that Paqueta's in, but then also Rice makes a run round the side on that side as well, and it immediately asks you a question of, well, now what do you do? Because now the zone that Souček is in is completely empty, and Paqueta's 2v1. What's your solution for that? So, teams with this level of tactical understanding are really good at adapting, and actually this brings us to our last point on tactics, and we've really gone in on the tactics on this one, which is their out of possession adaptations were brilliant and completely killed us in the first half from an in possession perspective, from what we wanted to do. We said in the preview podcast, they're going to detach the front 2 and then the 2 in midfield. And when I say detach front 2, they press really aggressively with the front 2, but they will detach from everyone else. They'll go really quickly, really aggressively. And they did. Havertz and Ødegaard, really aggressive, straight up onto our centre-backs. Very difficult to play through. We knew that would be the case, so we thought, okay, we'll float Souček higher, like we often do, and then you've got the potential to play long into the space. And that might be better against Arsenal, because when their front 2 go and press, the 2 in midfield jump up and support most of the time as well. We thought Rice and Partey, whoever it is, they're going to jump up as well, and they're going to lock on to Paqueta and Soler to make sure that the ball can't go into either of those 2. There's going to be no chance to play out. They're going to force us long, and then they'll look to Gabriel, Saliba to handle the duels and get them back on the attack. That's what we thought we would see. I think it's what Julian Lopetegui thought we would see as well from the way that we played. We saw Souček floated forward. We saw a lot of direct balls up the left side, particularly early in the game. All the stuff we imagined that we would see in this game, we spoke about on the preview pod. The big difference, and it changed everything, was that instead of Rice jumping forward to support the press as well, Trossard left the left wing, came inside and locked onto one of Paqueta and Soler, whilst Jorginho was the other player that came up and took the other player. So they were still matched up, 4v4 against our centre-backs and our double pivot. Wan-Bissaka's now the free player to play into, But because our game plan is to look to Soucek because we think he's going to be free, that's what we're doing. We're looking for Soucek, we're looking for Antonio all the time, but now Rice is there. So instead of it being empty and maybe one player wins the duel, the other player can pick up the seconds, they've got Rice there competing for all the seconds, which best player really in the world at that, competing for all the seconds. It killed us on that stuff. Antonio's first touch had to be so secure. He's not good at that. That meant that the ball bounced off him, and who nips in straight away on his toes to win the ball back? Declan Rice every time. So really difficult for us. And the massive difference was between us and them. A perfect way to sum up the gulf in tactical understanding between these two teams is we have Wan-Bissaka free a lot of those first 20, 25 minutes. We didn't use it once, didn't play out through it once. Even though we got Bowen pinning Calafiori inside, Wan-Bissaka has loads and loads of space. We could go with long diagonals out there. We could tuck him in deeper into Debo, play into Debo. Free pass out to Wan-Bissaka who could then carry. Didn't do it once. Didn't see it on the pitch. Our players did not see it. Arsenal, probably our highlight moment of the game, funniest moment of the game was they broke our press on one occasion. We jumped forward to press. It's Somerville who goes. We're pressing really, really aggressively. And they played into Saliba. And it was an opportunity to play out to Timber, really, wasn't it? If he turned around, he would have been able to play straight through to Timber and they would have been away. And Cal, can you do an impression of what we heard next to us at the moment that Saliba played backwards?
Mamma mia.
A bit more enthusiastic than that. There was a bang on the table and he shot out of the seat.
I think he wanted to swear, but he felt like he couldn't.
Yes, the Arsenal analysts were not happy, and I watched this back with Darcy earlier, who will come in to do extra time with us at the end of this podcast, where we'll talk about all the additional stuff. And we haven't been able to fit everything into this episode. So if there's a week where I would really encourage you to head over to Patreon to catch the second half of this podcast, because there's loads more stuff we want to talk about that we haven't been able to fit into to the main episode. We were going through it together earlier and we paused at that exact moment. And I was telling the story of the Arsenal analyst jumping up and saying, look, this was funny, as Cal and I were laughing when this happened. And Darcy went, well, look at all the Arsenal players. And on that freeze frame, and I'll post it later tonight when we're recording this, or I'll post it tomorrow. I'll find a time to post it on Twitter. So if you're looking for the exact image, it'll be somewhere. And at the exact moment the Arsenal analyst jumped up complaining about Saliba's pass back, every other player on the pitch for Arsenal were all pointing at Timber. All of them. Every single other player. Keeper, centre, Gabriel, Rice, Calafiori, everyone is pointing at Timber. And that shows for me the difference between a team at our stage of our evolution, learning, trying to find the best solutions, often operating in a bit of a combination of rigidity and structure, and then a little bit of personal license at the same time, and a mixture of the two to try and find the right balance to be a successful team. And Arsenal, who are down the line now in their evolution, they're ready to compete for titles. I think they're ready to win a title on the evidence that we saw in this game. I think if they play like this for the rest of the season, they've got a gap to make up. And it's going to be difficult because Liverpool are a very good side, but I don't know that Liverpool are a very good side this season because they're the best side in the world, or because they've continued a pace at a point that other sides have dropped off that pace. And if Arsenal match that pace that was previously being set by City and Arsenal, which they will do if they play like this across the rest of the season, they will be in with a shout come the end. It's just two different teams at two completely different levels. And very difficult for our players to be able to dominate in those circumstances, right?
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Look, we've absolutely hammered the tactical chat today, which I've loved.
This is you, man.
This
is all you.
It's been great fun. I hope it's been a good listen. We usually do a big chat on individual performances in the pod, like 15, 20 minutes on individual performances. You've at least heard some of our opinions on Paqueta's performance. We're going to go into more depth on him. We're going to go into more depth on lots of the other players, Soler, the two fullbacks, pretty much everyone in extra time. So please do join us over there. Even if you just set up a trial for this week, it's free for the week. Listen to the pod, have a look at some of the other stuff that's going on up there. You can always cancel before you're charged. Just sample it this week. Again, patreon.com/analyticsunited. But we're going to wrap up today really on the note that it's 3 games played against top 6 sides this season at home. It's 3 losses. And that's not something we saw in any of the 3 previous Premier League seasons. We only lost 2 games against the Big Six in all three of the three previous Premier League seasons, it feels like the gap in quality is so much more apparent than it's been at any point in recent years. It feels like the expectations are different now. It feels like we're coming into these games thinking, what do we expect, really? We're probably going to lose. I came away from the game feeling quite neutral. I posted about it. I think we talked about it afterwards, and both of us said, Leicester's really the game. We need to win against Leicester. But I don't think this is a huge step back from where we were after Newcastle. I think really it's more what happens in the next match that will tell us where we are in our own development and if things are moving in the right direction or not. And I think that's an indication of just how much has changed really over the last, and it's not just since Lopetegui's come in, because we got battered 6-0 at home against Arsenal at the back end of the previous season. It's really over the last year that competitiveness in these matches has kind of dissipated a little bit, hasn't it? Or a lot.
Yeah.
Or entirely.
Yeah, entirely. Yeah. I think we kind of we knew we kind of expected not this result, but probably not to win this. And as you've said, I think we'd both targeted Leicester and probably Wolves after that as well as two crucial games, and that will be the real litmus test of where we're at and whether Newcastle was a sort of step in the right direction or an anomalous result. Leicester now obviously a bit of a spanner in the works because they've got a new manager and it makes it impossible to know. But yeah, I think these sort of, it's such a difficult position to be in because like half of me is like, okay, yeah, I expected these teething problems, like with how much seismic change was happening at the club, whether it's on the pitch, whether it stems back to losing Rice, whether it stems back to Moyes leaving, whether it's learning how to work with Tim Steidten in the club and what that does to the club on a day-to-day level, whether it's
or just alongside Rice, many of the core group of the best period we had aging and being towards the end, having either retired or left, or Sofal's not in the team anymore, Cresswell's not in the team anymore. A lot of the players that kind of led that period are not really around so much anymore. Antonio is, but he's right at the very end. Souček and Bowen probably the only two guys really that have seen the whole thing. Yeah,
and I think this is where it's difficult, isn't it? Because it makes it much more difficult to sort of, what's the word? Like, analyze isn't the right word, but sort of. I can't think of it, like prescribe almost. It's like, how do I work out what is the causal factor of this issue when there's so many potential causal factors all happening at the same time in tandem? It's really difficult, and it makes it difficult to judge Lopetegui to an extent as well. But on the flip side, and this is probably where I land, is that amidst all this change, amidst all this chaos, is it not the job of the manager to come in and be the one that takes responsibility to steer that and bring some calm? And I think this is why the next two games are so crucial for me in terms of assessing where we're at, because I think the Newcastle result, I'll be completely candid, I was kind of over Lopetegui by then. I kind of felt like we should have pulled the trigger prior to that based on what I'd seen. The Newcastle result, because of what I saw and because I saw things click, and not just things click in terms of we won a match, but things that I'd predicted that we would see under Lopetegui before we'd even played a game this season, I'd started to notice on the pitch. And I thought, oh, okay, shit. It's clicking on the training ground. We're heading in the right direction because Lopetegui's tactics are now being implemented and there's a little bit of buy-in, and I'm seeing it away from home in a hostile atmosphere. Arsenal frustratingly came after that because you can't really make any judgment. So now the next two, if I see more of the Newcastle stuff and I see some tactical identity, I'll be willing to give him some more time, because I think you have to have, as I say, there needs to be some semblance of consistency throughout all the change, and it becomes difficult because we've had all this change with also our long-serving manager who had a lot of success leaving at the same time. But if all the other shit that's going on wasn't going on, you'd probably be able to cut Lopetegui a bit of slack. But unfortunately, these are the terms that he signed the contract on. This is what he knew he was entering into, and he has to be the one that comes in and is that consistent thing. And if that doesn't come out in games that we should be winning, and we don't see that based on what we've seen, in games that we should have been winning already this season, then I'm probably going to be back to where I was at before Newcastle. But if we do see it, then it's such a tricky position to be in, basically, as we're at a critical juncture, I think, and a lot rides on whether we get 6 points from the next 2 games, essentially.
Completely agree. I'm in the same place. I think it's too early after playing a game against such a good team to suggest that Newcastle was just a full storm and everything we saw in that game.
Yeah, which I think a lot of the media has been... I've heard a lot of that recently, is that his head's on the chopping block again because of the Arsenal result. I think his head was on the chopping block before the Newcastle game.
Yeah, exactly.
And I don't think his head was ever taken off it. It was probably just edged back slightly because of the win. But it wasn't as if he wasn't under immense amounts of pressure before the Arsenal game, and now we've lost 5-2. He is. He was already under immense amounts of pressure, and I think the Newcastle game probably made a lot of people forget that and just take it like as given that he's fine now because he's won against Newcastle at St James's Park. I don't think that's it. I think the two, it's just unfortunate scheduling, really. It's meant that these narratives can be spun, but I think if you zoom out, not a great deal has changed. We won against Newcastle, but we were crap before that. We lost to Arsenal, but we expected to lose. So I can kind of forget the Arsenal game as far as I'm concerned, because Arsenal are Arsenal and we are where we are. And yeah,
in the context of this season, yes. I think the thing for me that I would draw out, and yeah, this is classic Jack, I know, and forgive me everyone, I know you're all probably thinking, oh yeah, Jack goes again. But the blowouts are back, and they were seeping in before when at the end of Moyes' tenure, and I think a lot of that for me personally, and I know, I'm taking a leap here because of what you just said, it's difficult to diagnose. A lot of that for me was down to profiles and aging players and just not being able to do the basics of that system, because I don't think the system ever really changes. Do you know what I mean? I think my position on the system is my position on the system. Like it is what it is. It works when it works, and your players have to be good at dominating their zones, defending the box, defending set pieces, attacking set pieces in order to make it work. And if you stop being able to do elements of that, then it's going to be difficult. And there were other things that changed, increasing usage of a box midfield that caused or asked bigger questions of the system that we preferred to use. Absolutely. We were often suffering 4v3 situations in midfield, and that made it more difficult for us. Absolutely. But I think a lot of what went wrong was down to losing key players and other players falling off the edge of a cliff, like losing Rice and then Zuma falling off the edge of a cliff, quite literally, in terms of his performance is a bad combination to have alongside recruitment that failed at addressing problems that we had at centre-back that predated that anyway, really. So I think, yeah, I put that in a box, and that's just how I understand it. And it's probably not the full story. It isn't the full story, I accept that, but it's how I look back and understand some of the things that happened in kind of short form. And I look at what we do now, and I think, yeah, like there's some good stuff here. There's road for development, and I've not been happy with a lot of what we saw this season, but I think there's definite upside to moving away from that kind of very old-fashioned, maybe structure, very high level of rigidity, etc., etc. I do think that one thing that's just fundamental to winning football matches in the Premier League is you just can't defend set pieces like that. You can't defend set pieces that badly. And as much as we've explored the whole narrative of the game, we've explored all the different tactical issues, we've explored different things that went well, lots of things that went badly, things we learned for the course of the rest of this season, things that maybe we have to change as a result, man-to-man zone, all that stuff. You won't win games if you don't defend set pieces well. I think we're up there now as a team that's conceded the most, if not one of the most set pieces in the league this season. It's a problem, and it needs to be better, and I need to see us attack and defend set pieces at a much higher level. Mm-hmm. And that would be the big lesson for me from this football match, is that this current group stuff at West Ham are not really getting the best out of our players defending or attacking set pieces. And whether that means that we need to hire a set piece coach, or whether it means we need to look in next summer to bring in players that may be a bit more dominant at set pieces or whatever, and fit them in somewhere into the lineup, something needs to change, because this, regardless of whether our ambitions are to stay up, finish in mid-table, compete for Europe or whatever, it's going to knock us just off that level consistently because we'll lose games that we shouldn't lose, or we'll lose games by bigger margins than we should because, or the draws will become losses or whatever because we're failing to dominate those fine margins. So yeah, something that definitely needs to improve regardless of all of the rest of it. Yeah, and anyway, rigid structure narrows the margins, makes you better. That's fine. Like you said, the quality of the opposition. What's all matters? Anyway, I'll leave it at that before I go off on one. Join us on Extra Time. We'll talk about the second half. We'll talk about the tactical changes there and all the individual performances. If not, we will see you next week. There'll be a breakdown next week covering both Wolves and Leicester, which will give us all of the story, hopefully, of the key matches that Cal talked about. But thank you for listening. Thank you, Cal. And
No
I'll catch you
problem.
then.
Thank you.